Welcome, everybody, to Brute Facts. I got a fun one today. We've got Dustin Crummett, and he is coming from Munich, Germany. Dustin's got a PhD from Notre Dame. He has written and submitted many articles, chapters to books. I believe ethics is his specialty. Although as smart as he is, I think he's pretty much got all of it covered. So I'm going to bring him on. And how are you doing?
All right.
Yeah,
we were saying it's a bit late here, but
yeah, I was going to say it's a little dark in there. It's out the window anyway.
Yeah.
What are you, 7 hours ahead of Central Time, I believe it is?
Yeah. So it's 11.
Yeah. We'll try not to keep you all night. It's so tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became a Christian, how you got into philosophy of religion and ethics, and kind of where you are, who you are.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so I'm here in Munich doing a 2-year postdoc at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. I was raised in a pretty conservative evangelical church, and I guess So I mean that's what I believed when I was young. As I got older, I sort of started questioning the many of the reasons that people around me had seemed like ones that weren't persuasive to me. They didn't believe in evolution or whatever. So I started wondering, is any of this right? Is Christianity true? Does God exist? I didn't want to sort of give up on things too easily. At the same time, I couldn't, even if I had wanted to, I don't think I could have just decided to believe something, because I wanted to or whatever. So I started, trying to think very seriously about these things. Long story short, I started reading, when I was in high school, C.S. Lewis and Richard Dawkins and some of those sorts of folks. And then when I went to college, became exposed to, academic philosophy. That was, I guess I had sort of already in high school become a little bit familiar with academic philosophy just by reading Wikipedia articles and, seeing the name Alvin Plantinga or whatever. But so that was that was sort of my my initial introduction to philosophy of religion. You can maybe just barely see my cat.
He or she?
He. There's also a she. She's a little further out of frame.
Well, of course, leave it to Mel to want to be all up in it. I would have a cat if it wasn't for the fact that I'm afraid my children would hurt my cat. No. But no, that's cool. Like, similar kind of story, other than my background. I really didn't have the opportunity for the academic route. But I was, same thing, the conservative Christian, the false dichotomies between science and, certain interpretations of scripture, and being a science guy. I love science. So, I was in constant struggle with that.
Yeah.
So, and of course, actually philosophy of religion didn't come for me until a long time after. I just kind of, stumbled into everything, the apologetics, and didn't even know what apologetics was. And next thing I knew, somebody was accusing me of being a presuppositional apologetic, and so I was kind of just flailing around, and till I found a lot of you guys on Facebook and the groups that were in there.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of reading on your work, and I was actually stunned to find that there was an intellectual side to Christianity, because we were in such an anti-intellectual environment that everything was faith. This feediest kind of faith. It just take it. So I have the new segment, which it's not new. We've been doing kind of the beer, but this time I actually have a clip for it. So let's cue that up. Yeah, that was neat, wasn't it? So what are you drinking on tonight, Dustin?
I am having what's called an Augustiner. Munich, of course, is famous for its beers. It's the home of Oktoberfest. Augustiner is the oldest brewery in Munich.
Wow.
And it dates back to 1328.
That's some real beer.
It was originally a monastery brewery. Which is sort of happy monk on the.
Just leave it to the theists to come up with all of the party stuff. We got the Southern Baptist preachers with the bourbon here. So I am actually drinking because we're snowed in. I'm in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. We don't normally get snow. We've got about 8 inches of snow outside, and it's been that way for over 2 days. So I wasn't able to get to my beer store, and it's like 0 degrees. So my beer of the night is actually a coffee with Baileys because it's very cold. So nothing special, nothing new. I hope to have had something better, but, 4-wheel drive only helps you going up hills. It doesn't help you going downhill. So we didn't want to get out and trek on that, but so we'll save the beer for another day. So we were kind of tossing around topics to talk about. I really love, the bioethics, but you've also written on divine hiddenness, and I don't think that that is one that really gets covered enough, in my opinion, because I think I have pretty large contingency of atheists that I'm friends with, and one of the biggest hangups is, well, why is it so easy for you and not me? Why do you see it and I don't see it? Why is he not obvious? Why doesn't he come down and say, hey, here I am, kind of thing. And I've done a little bit of reading on it. I've done, I've read a little bit of Plantinga's work. And Schellenberg, I think, is the one that you were replying to in one of your papers. Is it Mosier wrote on it? I think so. And I'm interested in the responsibility argument because the way that I normally come at it is, I try to be one of those people who, don't try to act like I'm smart in an area that I'm not. And I haven't done a lot of research in it. So I kind of just give my idea of it. And typically what I respond with is something of the kind, with God, if we're looking at God as, the ultimate foundation of good, the ontological grounding of good or things of that nature, if he is as powerful as he is, and he is, that much, he is pure goodness, then exposure to God, too much exposure to God would, even though we would have free will, technically, we wouldn't really be able to exercise it. So being too close to God or God being too obvious, in my opinion, it would seem that, being, as powerfully as he is, that, it would kind of like if we're in heaven, the idea of heaven, that we're going to be so close to the source of ultimate goodness. Even if we could sin, we wouldn't sin, because we wouldn't desire those things. But you guys come at it from a responsibility angle, which I find pretty interesting. And honestly, I haven't done a whole lot of reading in that area. I read your paper, like I said, a little bit here and there. So if you could just kind of give us a brief summary of the idea behind that.
Right. Yeah, so I guess it might be good to explicitly lay out sort of what divine hiddenness is supposed to be, and then we can talk about that, I guess. Divine hiddenness in general is something like this idea that look, if God existed, then things would be more obvious to us in some way, right? Usually what people focus on in the philosophy of religion literature is what's called non-resistant non-belief. This idea that, look, it seems like there are lots of people who are atheists, but, as far as you can tell, they seem to be honestly investigating the questions. Some of them, it seems like, maybe they used to be religious and they lost their faith, and it seems like they tried really hard to hold on. They read apologetics, and for whatever reason, they just weren't convinced. And so, you have these people who are atheists, and it doesn't seem like it's because they're, willfully refusing to believe or whatever, or, anything like that. It seems like, they're doing their best. And so people say, well, if God existed, God wouldn't let that happen, right? God would somehow make it clear to these people, maybe with, a really powerful religious experience, maybe by, writing the Nicene Creed out in the stars, whatever it took, somehow. I think John Leslie suggests that every grain of sand in the world could have made by God written on it in really tiny letters. Put it in a microscope. Oh, okay. So a lot of ways God could do this. There are some other forms of the problem too, maybe, that I talk a little bit about in the paper, or sort of gesture towards, that don't get discussed as much. You might also think, well, there's lots of religious disagreement. People, there are all these different religions. They agree on a lot of stuff. They disagree on a lot of stuff. A lot of what determines which religion you're in seems to be just, where you're born, what your community is. It doesn't seem a priori like people in Christian nations are likely to be, more virtuous or something than people in non-Christian nations. So why is it that religious belief is sort of demographically distributed in the way that it is? Within Christianity, there are lots of disagreements. People who disagree with each other about theological doctrines. Also, people who think that, they're supposed to do bad stuff. People have committed all sorts of atrocities, these sorts of things. Again, maybe some of those people were just, they were using it as an excuse or something, but it might be that some of them genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. And then there's what we maybe could call like experiential hiddenness. There are people who they do believe in God, but they don't have a sense of God's presence, even though they would like one. Sometimes even during very difficult circumstances, they feel abandoned. I guess Mother Teresa felt like this during large periods of her life. So there are a lot of ways in which it seems like God could kind of make that he exists more obvious to us, make what he expects to us expects of us more obvious to us, make his love for us, his presence with us more obvious to us, easier to feel. And yet God doesn't do this. And so people like Schellenberg say, well, look, this just shows that God doesn't exist, right? And that's why these things are more obvious. That's why God doesn't clear stuff up, because God just doesn't exist. And what the theist needs to do is show why this is not a good argument, right, or not a conclusive argument against theism. So there are kind of a wide variety of approaches people have taken. There are two different approaches that kind of both appeal to freedom, responsibility, that sort of notion, but in different ways. So one was the idea that you were mentioning. Well, if God made things too obvious to us, then it would almost be like God, mom was always in the room watching you, right. And you're not going to behave. You're not going to misbehave when mom is in the room watching you. But that's not really because you're virtuous or you want to do the right thing, or it's just because mom's watching and you don't want to get punished, or maybe you don't want to disappoint her or something. But and so in that way, some people argue we need. Hey, bud.
He helped out on that paper, didn't
he? We need some epistemic distance from God to give us room for free choice and
right.
The responsibility argument that I and Swinburne and Dumsday defend is a little different. So it's also appealing to freedom and responsibility, but not so much because the worry is that our freedom to decide, whether to commit some ordinary bad act would be undermined. But rather because the thought is divine hiddenness itself gives us a certain important sort of responsibility for one another, the ability to freely choose whether or not we are going to help one another find spiritual truth, grow and mature as Christians, investigate these questions together, develop a better sense of the presence of God. How can we affect one another's ability to experience God in community through worship? All these sorts of things. The thought is God's giving us this sort of responsibility for one another, making us responsible for one another's ability to learn about God, to develop a relationship with God, etc. This is a good thing insofar as it, gives us this important sort of responsibility, makes us reliant on one another, allows us to build deeper relationships with each other, ones in which we have, helped each other in this vitally important way. At the same time, it might be that sometimes we fall down on the job, right? And that could be just by not living up to sort of our positive obligations. That could also be by being a stumbling block, so to speak, right? If you think about, say, all of the people whose faith was harmed by the sex scandals in the Catholic Church, that was a situation where people, because they were abusing their position, because they were, acting badly, they provided an impediment to other people being able to relate to God, right? And so the thought is, God has given us this responsibility. This kind of predicts that hiddenness will exist when we make mistakes, which we often do. It seems plausible that there's something valuable about this sort of responsibility. So, it's not wild to posit that God might give it to us. It seems sort of in line with Christian teaching, with the thought that, the church is meant to be this spiritual community that teaches people about God and relates to God. We're supposed to relate to God together as a community. And so, that's sort of the story.
I really like, I like that, I don't want to say angle, but that idea, because it creates a participation in the divine hiddenness. It's not we sit back and point fingers at God and say, why can't I, know you? Why are you not here? Why can't I see you? Things like that. And I like it also because personal responsibility, like you were talking about, to help one another, because I'm a big relationship kind of guy. I don't like traditional evangelism. I don't like knocking on people's doors. I don't like going and beating people over the head with the Bible. I like to kind of build a relationship with them. And, eventually the topic comes up. It's just one of those topics that it's almost unavoidable, in relationships and things like that. So, and that's typically, I don't want to be a stumbling block in the way of not fulfilling my duty. But at the same time, in my opinion, it is much more important to establish a relationship, to actually show the love of Christ, to treat people like Christ did, but with the personal responsibility, that sounds like it would, kind of line up directly with it. And kind of building those relationships.
Yeah.
So what was Schellenberg's objection to, I saw that you had responded to it in the paper. I didn't get to read his full view on it. So
it'll be, let me see if I can remember it. So I wrote this paper now about 8 or 9 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, so I have to think back.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
I have to think back to what all I said and what I was reading. So I guess, Schellenberg is responding to Swinburne and Domesday's versions of this. And Swinburne and Domesday, with a few exceptions, but they mostly sort of focus on, you ask, well, okay, so we have this responsibility for one another. How are we supposed to exercise this responsibility, right? If God hasn't given us some way to fulfill the responsibility, then the account doesn't work, right? If God can't put us in charge of like the cycles of the moon or something, because we can't affect that, right? So how am I supposed to take responsibility for other people? And Domesday and Swinburne both think of this primarily in terms of like developing and spreading natural theological arguments, right? So like the main way we do this is through, I guess, philosophy and apologetics. And of course, as philosophers, we're naturally drawn to the thought that doing philosophy is sort of the main way that we exercise this responsibility, right? And Schellenberg's thought, I guess, is, look, but like lots of people, hear these arguments you guys have and they're not convinced. So like clearly, God hasn't actually given us the means to fulfill this responsibility that you say, right? Like sometimes you guys do your thing and it just doesn't work because some people aren't convinced. Whether or not they should be convinced by your arguments, they're not, and it's not their fault. It just doesn't seem plausible to them or whatever. Or there's some other argument they're worried about, whatever it is. I suggest that we can sort of get around. This is one of a couple objections he has, but this is sort of the main one, and sort of the main way in which I guess my approach tries to sort of elaborate on or expand upon what Swinburne and Domesday have done. I say, well, look, maybe we need to take kind of a more comprehensive view of what the mechanisms by which we can take responsibility for one another are, right? Most people, I think, don't keep or lose their faith on the basis of, detailed study of philosophical arguments or whatever. It's more a matter of their own experiences, their sense of a community, their sense of experiencing God in this community or not, their sense that these people, seem to be, I feel like I can see God through these people in this community, or, these people are a bunch of liars and hypocrites, and they're just using this as an excuse to control people, and not only is that true kind of on the community level, but also on like a societal level. People have worries about, historical atrocities that the church has committed, or they feel like, Christians don't do enough to address problem X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah, blah. They see some megachurch pastor who does something bad, and they think, these people are all hucksters. And so I think that there are a lot of things that kind of affect how plausible these things, these claims strike people beyond just detailed study of philosophical arguments and stuff. And if we think about all of those things, it becomes much less clear, I think, that we don't have the kind of the necessary mechanisms, right? I think that natural theology is important. I think that philosophical arguments are important. I'm a philosopher, so of course I think that. So I think, doing that, but also, building relationships with people in which they can see Christ through you, see God through you. Again, encouraging people in spiritual disciplines, trying to make it seem to people that, theism is a good thing, an attractive thing. that Christianity is a good thing, an attractive thing. Those are things that kind of shape people's intuitions, shape, whether people feel like they have some kind of experiential sense of God's presence or not, whether, which things strike them as intuitively correct or intuitively incorrect. And so if you imagine a world where, Christians are consistently very well behaved, where our communities are very strong, where we encourage one another in prayer and worship, where we take care of the needy among us, if we were all living maybe more like the community in Acts or something, maybe, I don't know, maybe that would affect a lot of people who, are left cold by natural theological arguments or whatever, as things stand. Right. And so, we've never quite lived in a world like that, and I guess we probably never will. So we don't know exactly what things would be like. But it seems pretty plausible to think that, a lot of people would find it a lot easier to believe in that sort of situation and would find it a lot easier to have a sense of God's presence. And so, I think the idea, once we take a broader conception of what it is that we're supposed to be doing, the idea that we can affect one another in these ways doesn't seem outlandish, in the way that Schellenberg thinks.
Right. That's the thing is, one of the things that gets levied the most is, well, what about Christians that do this, Christians that do that, and I'm constantly reminded, first of all, I'm not going to blow it off. I'm going to address it and say, well, that's wrong. Christian or not, they're wrong for what they did. But second of all, we're not perfect. We're not going to do, we're to strive to be better. We're to strive to be better towards people and things of that nature. That's not our main focus, though. And being fallen also is we're not going to be perfect. We just can't do it, And I think there's a lot of confirmation bias that plays into, which we all suffer from confirmation bias. If it seems like one Christian, two Christian, well, then it's 50 Christians. Then next thing you know, it's all Christians. And I actually have a friend of mine who said something that was really simple, but kind of really opened my eyes. And he said, well, if Christians are a bunch of hypocrites, shouldn't they be in church? Isn't that where they should be? And I'm just like, yeah, I guess so. I mean, they're actually addressing, if they're addressing the issue, then but there's a bigger point that I'd like to talk about a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about the sense of community. Mm-hmm. And that's right along the lines of this book I've been reading, Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes. And it talks about Western individualism and how most cultures around the world and historically have been collectivist. They've been community oriented each other. And, a lot of the Western world, in my experience, and at least from what I've read and everything, seems to be where the most non-believers are. And we have these different virtues that other cultures don't think are virtues. In some places, it's, they're actually vices. And, being alone and things of that nature, they're to a lot of other cultures, like he was talking about in the book, was, the guy asked him when he was in Indonesia, the guy asked him, why would you want to be alone? He's like, because to them, that's just, it's loneliness, So I think when we've lost sight of the kind of collectivist idea that a lot of cultures have. So we have lost that sense of community. Although there are still a lot of people that do community things where they live, the structure of society is so individualistic that we don't have that support. We don't have, when was it the Roman centurion, when he was saved, it was not just him, it was his family. He didn't do it. He had to talk to his family about it because it was such a big issue and a community issue that's the way that they handled those things. And, not only in an individualistic way do we approach scripture in our homes without community, with this 21st century idea of what we think it means. Traditionally, it's something that's been done together as a community. And so, it's no wonder we have so many different denominations, so many different beliefs. But I think that's an extremely important point is, the loss of community that we seem to have in the Western world.
Yeah. And that leads to lots of other problems too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Western problems. So just speaking on that part of it, what is it, how is Germany? What is their approach to theism or Christianity or community? Is it welcoming or?
So that's a good question. I mean, I found I'm an Episcopalian. I found an Episcopal church quite close to my house here, which is mostly expatriates, Americans, but also British people from Africa. It's a nice community. Germany, I think, is probably less religious than the U.S., but still more religious than a lot of other European countries, or at least some other European countries. I presented a philosophy of religion paper to the ethics reading group here. It was sort of a combined ethics and philosophy of religion paper, and people had no idea what I was doing. They couldn't figure out why I had written this weird paper. They couldn't. One of the people asked, does anybody believe this stuff? And I was like, well, half the people in the world at least. One person didn't understand that. I mean, he started presenting me with this objection, and it ultimately became clear his objection was premised on the fact that he didn't understand that people who believe in heaven believe that you go to heaven. He was thinking that, well, there's it's as if there's a clone or a replacement, but of course that couldn't really be you. You're dead and you decompose.
Oh, wow.
Sort of, and it took me a while to figure out, what the basis for this question was. But so, I mean, it's a little bit of a biased sample. I mean, there are philosophers of religion in Germany. So, but it may be that kind of the German, again, is very anecdotal, but my anecdotal evidence is that the German philosophy scene may be even less religious than the American philosophy scene, or the kind of Anglo-American philosophy scene, which is already pretty secular, outside of philosophy of religion, where most people are theists.
I think it's funny when I hear certain people, I'm not going to say any names, but use consensus in philosophy when they're talking about philosophy of religion. And I'm like, okay, I mean, it's mostly secular. Of course, there's going to be a consensus, So not in philosophy of religion, there's not a consensus, but philosophy overall, So I think it's funny. And I think that story highlights an important thing. And that is, the cliche, lost in translation. People don't realize the concepts that are different from culture to culture, language to language. So the difficulty in translating is trying to translate the concept of it, and I think that's how we've ended up in the West with this, this extreme literalism that a lot of conservative Protestants have, adhered to, is these, it's not cultures and languages that we can translate word for word. There wasn't a dictation method, that created this inerrancy. We can't look at it, a culture that was, thousands and thousands of years ago. Like when people are hammering against slavery in the Old Testament and, all these different things. And I'm like, we're missing so much context. We can explain it. You can't use a type of anachronistic fallacy where you're using this 21st century understanding of the way that the world was, at that time. And we have to understand that we have to approach it from their eyes. That's how we get the understanding, So, yeah, that's I think it's a huge part of what's led to so much secularism here, at least in the U.S. I really can't speak for European countries, but they're Western in nature too. So it's I don't know.
Yeah, I think it sort of helps. Some of my experiences with my philosophy colleagues help to illustrate. I think that more so than the U.S., parts of Europe have sort of become non-religious enough that people can kind of be non-religious without really even having much of a concept of what they're rejecting. They just haven't. It wouldn't occur to them that people would take this seriously, and they don't really know what religious people believe. And, it's not that they weighed the arguments and found it wanting so much as it's never really come up for them in the way that, believing in the flat earth or whatever, it might just never really come up for, me. And so, yeah, that presents sort of it's a very different context.
It's kind of like the opposite of conservative Christian Protestants here, who just kind of come up in it and accept it. So they go from this, weird understanding of faith to the other extreme. There's not enough evidence, which a lot of the issues that I run into is, it's really just epistemic issues. It's, your epistemology is so, in a lot of cases, is at the point where it's really not consistent, because you don't put the same epistemic standards on everything else, that you accept as true in the world. But so with the divine hiddenness, I'm just trying to think of an easy way to put it. Let's say with other cultures who are raised in a Hindu society or Islamic society, things of that nature, would they be considered kind of along the lines of fulfilling that community responsibility, even though their idea of God is distorted or not as the Judeo-Christian, monotheistic God? Would that play into how we are to fulfill our side, the opening that God had left for us to learn together? How do they play into that idea?
Yeah, well, so I'm actually part of a
He's determined to be on there. That's okay. All pets are welcome.
He really wants attention. He's jealous that I'm talking to you.
Yeah, he's jealous now.
I'm actually part of a project on animals and the philosophy of the Islamic world here. So the broader research project is an Islamic philosophy project. The work that I'm doing is not in Islamic philosophy, but the research that some of my colleagues are doing is. So as a result, I've gotten some exposure to Islamic philosophy more than I used to. And I mean, yeah, there are definitely things that I think we can learn from, people who were within that tradition, sort of smart people doing their best to try to figure stuff out. I think that, so there's, to some extent, we can cooperate even or learn from people who we disagree with, even if we think, well, they're importantly wrong about some other stuff. I guess I also think, it may be that, and this kind of connects to another issue that Schellenberg talks about, which is this issue of spatially and temporally isolated non-theists. So another thing he says is, well, look, there were people in isolated tribes or, people in ancient Greece who didn't have any concept of monotheism or, whatever. So we couldn't have taken responsibility for those because maybe there weren't any monotheists yet a very long time ago, or, these people were off in some far-flung part of the world. We didn't have any concept with them. We didn't have any contact with them. What I say in the paper there is it may be that there are kind of historical explanations for why people wound up isolated to begin with, in terms of either, the fall or, events in prehistory, or maybe, events closer to our time, but not necessarily involving like the people in some particular community having made any mistake or whatever, right? It might be that those people are doing their best, and it's just that, various circumstances have left some people in kind of an epistemically better situation than others. Right. So, yeah, I mean, you don't have to say that it's it's we have a more accurate picture because like we're more virtuous or something. Right. We sort of found ourselves in more fortunate circumstances. Now, in terms of how would you kind of practically relate to people in different religious communities or whatever? Well, we have disagreements, and we want to convince them that we're on the right side. I guess that's sort of a practical question that I don't have much experience with personally so much. And so I'm reluctant to kind of expound on the best way to do that practically, because I other people know more about it than me. How do you handle like interfaith dialogue? Yeah, I mean, as a where there are like philosophical issues or historical issues or whatever, you can have factual conversations about those. And otherwise, yeah, I guess you want to do the sort of stuff that I was talking about. Form relationships, try to be a good model, a good example, let others see God through you, through your good behavior, through your righteous living, whatever.
I'm a hopeful universalist. I've tried to get on the universalist camp. Philosophically, I want, from a philosophical standpoint, I feel, I would much rather, obviously, that universalism be true. I just, biblically, I just haven't been totally convinced, looking at the history and things like that. But I take to heart, God being a righteous judge. And I don't concern myself with, if I don't say this, I don't say that, this, that, or the other, that somehow somebody's going to be condemned if there is a hell or condemnation or something of that nature. I approach it as I'm going to love them, and I'm going to treat them with dignity, regardless of where they're from, what they believe, don't believe, this, that, or the other, and the rest is up to God. That's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. I have no position whatsoever to say, whether a Hindu or Muslim or anybody who's grown up in an environment is going here, there, whatever. I think while we can learn things, through, natural revelation and, philosophy and theology and different things, we're extremely limited in, what we do know. And so I kind of leave it at that. Kind of on the animal ethics thing. That is the one that I've kind of struggled with myself, with the way that, a lot of animals are treated in the Western world ethically. And my wife and I were actually just having this conversation the other night, about animals in captivity, zoos, circuses, things of that nature. And I understand that in some situations it's the best thing for the animal, but, bringing animals up and, in a zoo environment and things like that, and taking them out of their natural habitat, that's something I really struggle with as a Christian, because given our limited knowledge on, souls, consciousness, and things of that nature, with at least our higher primates, the level of consciousness they have, it just, to me, on a certain level, just doesn't seem humane. And a lot of Christians kind of take more of a lot of Christians here take more of a hard stance on it, that humans are special species and we have a soul and we're going to heaven, and it's like there's this assumption that animals don't have souls. And, and I'm like, wait a minute, we don't know much about souls at all, So what is it, coming from an ethicist standpoint, and animal ethics, is that kind of in the realm of, your study, or how do you look at it?
I think it is. So I've both done some work in, you might say, mainstream animal ethics, and I've done some work in kind of issues concerning animals and philosophy of religion. I think that we treat animals in a lot of ways that are very bad, particularly like in industrial agriculture, factory farming. Billions and billions of animals who are kept in horrible conditions, often killed in painful ways, just because we can want cheaper meat or whatever. So I'm very much against that. I've argued in some of my work. Well, maybe one thing that's relevant. I'm working on a paper right now, actually, about ideas of dominion, like human dominion over the other animals. People sometimes understand that to mean almost that God has set us up as like absolute dictators over the animals.
Right.
They're sort of all our property. We can do whatever we want to them. And there's nothing in the text that suggests that. In fact, when God gives us dominion, we're still supposed to be vegetarians at that point in the text. Later on, he gives Noah permission to eat meat because of the changed environment and whatever. But at that point, we're still supposed to be vegetarians. So clearly the text can't mean that we're allowed to do whatever we want to them, right?
Absolutely.
So I try to defend the idea of dominion thought of as more like some sort of stewardship idea. We have, a certain sort of special role in God's plan. We have a certain sort of authority over the world, over the other animals, maybe, but that's not something for us to, just exploit for our own benefit however we want. That's something that we need to exercise, thinking about the interests of the individuals that we have authority over, just like, a just government has authority over you, but that doesn't mean it can do whatever it wants. That means the opposite. It means that the leaders have to pay special attention to your interests because, they now have a special responsibility to exercise this
protection and flourishing. And absolutely.
One thing I try to address in that paper is questions about our obligations to wild animals too. I think that, I definitely we may have similar views on this. I think.
That's and that's I kind of like the dominion thing you were talking about, and I kind of equate that with like, don't press the analogy too hard, but animals are like children. They're not as aware and as capable as we are. Yet it doesn't mean that they're not worthy of protection, love, and letting them be what they are. Because that's I'm so hopeful for the strides that's been made in laboratory grown steaks.
Yeah,
so that we can have our steaks and treat the animals well at the same time. I know it sounds weird, but I mean, it's a steak. It's how we can have our cake and eat it too. It's so yeah. And I've been because I come from here in the South. There's a lot of hunting and things like that, and I think a lot of people really misunderstand hunters. Most of the hunters I know are very, very compassionate people. I've watched people, grown men who don't trophy hunt, but, that actually pray over, the meat that they have, and they use every bit of the animal for their needs. And, they put a lot of money into conservation and protecting. So I mean, I'm not going to say I'm a hunter's advocate, because the truth of the matter is most hunters are trophy hunters. My issues with hunting itself is that very issue. We don't have to hunt for our food, and trophy hunting to me is given the way that I feel about animals. So one of the best friends I ever had was a dog. He was, and for me to say that there's not to see, the different emotions that, my dog felt, the way that he related. He could, when I was hurting, it seemed like he was hurting, things like that. It's just, I don't understand how people can take this dominion stance you were talking about. It seems to be mostly, in my experience in the Western world, it's the way we treat animals. It's like, well, they're just part of the creation, and we're supposed to, they're for our use and things like that. And the more I look into different theodicies and things of that nature, theories on the soul and stuff like that. It's like we don't have anything definitive there, So to take such a hard stance is not cool on my idea. I know it's getting kind of late over there for you. I didn't know if there's anything else maybe you'd want to talk about, or you ready to?
Well, I guess it's up to you.
Well, I just didn't want to keep you. I really appreciate you. Staying up to kind of do this and talk about these things, and giving your expertise and things of that nature.
Sure.
Maybe one day I'll be able to sit in the same room with you. I don't know. No, but I won't keep you too long. We'll definitely we can do another show, maybe on the ethics or something of that nature. Again, I really appreciate you coming.
Sure, thank you.
And be safe in Germany, Munich. It's yeah. So I'm going to break my stuff over here if I keep moving around. But have a good one, bud.
Yeah. You too.
All right.